have the Prime Minister to take the debate forward.
So this is Tabitha, the Prime Minister. The motion of today is that this House opposes the mandatory disclosure of one's STD or UTI status, e.g., HIV status, as a pre-employment requirement. So we are defining mandatory disclosure. To me, is to make something compulsorily known to a group. And in this particular case, we are referring to all company employees. STDs or UTI status, basically, that is simple. That is to mean the health situation of a person regarding their STD or UTI status. Also, we are going to define pre-employment requirement as something strictly needed in order to get a job or employment in a particular place or company. So, ladies and gentlemen, giving such definitions, it is on that basis that we say that we oppose this, or we do not agree with the mandatory disclosure of one's health status. And why are we saying this? One, this is sort of discriminatory in nature, whereby if someone is being forced, because just like I had already said, the word mandatory is basically to force someone to compulsorily relinquish information about their status. Now, if a company comes in and forces a person to release such information to all company employees, then it will mean that this person will be discriminated against. Why? It's because these people are imposing the requirement of the fact that they have to disclose this information rather than choosing employ these people based on their abilities to perform the job. Secondly, we are talking about the right to privacy. Each and every person has a right to privacy as stipulated under the Constitution and Declaration of Human Rights. Each and every person has a right to keep whatever information that is attached to them private. Now, if a employment requirement, them disclose, then it means that they will be encroaching on this right to privacy. Now, the opposition might come saying that no, they are doing this for the ladies and gentlemen. You cannot expect someone the basis of that. Why? Because it is upon their choice to disclose this. You cannot force it out of them, and that's why we are saying that point cannot stand. Then at the same time, taken.
Do you believe it is legitimate for companies to employ the best employees and leave out other people? Even isn't that discrimination at best?
Thank you very much. Now, in this particular case, we are not discriminating upon sort of their abilities or anything. At the end of that day, a company's aim is to get the best out of the people that they're trying to employ. We are simply saying that people should be taken in for their ability and for the skills might not be as much as they require, but then still, when they're in the company, they can to better their skills. But we are simply saying that now making this people disclose their health status should not be a requirement at all. In fact, it should not be as something that they should be demanding, because there is no way these people can perform if they know that all the people around their health status. It will create a certain discomfort at the workplace, psychological trauma, to find that everyone is staring you at you because they know that you are HIV positive. And ladies and gentlemen, to arrive to the conclusion that the companies should base on the ability of someone to perform rather than their on their health status. And that's why we are saying it is very discriminatory. And we are saying that Article 22 of the Constitution does not accept that. It accepts equality, and that's why we are saying each and every person, regardless of their status, should be given a chance to fight a position. And it is not discriminatory, just like the opposition is trying to, but rather it's important for fight for a certain job rather than discriminate who are sick and trying to force them into opening up about their statuses. And furthermore, we are saying that yes, they have the right to privacy, which we must protect, very much guaranteed under the Constitution and very much protected under the same Constitution. So, ladies and gentlemen, we as the opening say that yes, the mandatory disclosure of one's health status as an employment requirement, because it is discriminatory in nature and it violates their right to privacy, and it should not be a requirement any in time for them to disclose. These people should just be given a chance and a level like everyone else to fight for a job in a certain, because they possess the skills, the abilities, and the requirements that are required to get the job in the company. That we rest our case.
Prime Minister, for that fine speech. Let's proceed to have the leader of the opposition. That's the case. Hey, hey.
Can I confirm that you're getting me loud and clear?
Yes, I'm also going to confirm whether other judges can hear you. Simon, can you hear him very well and together with Moses? Chat space.
Simon here, I can hear you very well.
What
Yes.
about Moses?
Yes, Moses can hear you very well as well.
Okay, good. Agaba is saying they can't hear you very well. Does anyone still have a listening problem to the leader of opposition? Because we need to carry forth. Yes. Does anyone else have? Agaba, do you still have a listening problem? Agaba, I'm going to ask for the last time. Do you still have the hearing problem, hearing the leader of opposition? I see he's typing the chat space just shortly. Oh, sure.
Okay.
He can now
get me.
They can now get you. Kindly proceed with
Yeah.
your
Okay, I will begin in 3, 2, 1. As a panel, the kind of characterization we get from opening government is itself a very poor one, that it is actually no better reason for us to opt away from mandatory disclosure of one's HIV status or STD or STI status as a prerequisite for employment, because at a time when opening government assumes that we shall disclose information to all the employees, it is itself very disappointing and wanting, because in the first place the employees are not the people that employ. There is an employer. So we feel like this is an agreement between an employer and an employee, an individual employee with the employer that is employing them. So I feel like with that kind of characterization, it is best that we could understand why there is reason for us, why there is reason for each and every individual before getting employed, them giving out, disclosing their statuses, their health statuses. So what we get from opening government, one was it is discriminatory in nature. They come and tell us that when someone releases this kind of information, so they will feel out of place, and with their presumption that this is information known to all employees, we feel that kind of argument is itself weak, and already showing you poor characterization lays the whole case down, because discriminatorily, it is only known to the employee. And there is an agreement between the employee, the state, and the employer. So I feel this kind of information is so secret, to as much as it is secret to the hospital that actually discloses this kind of information and the person who is HIV positive. That is how secret this information can be. So they also come and they also come and talk about these people have the right to privacy. So we question the kind of privacy on grounds of do these people actually wake up one day and I realize that I'm HIV positive or not? Already the hospital has known, and the hospital is not operated by robots in the first place. Such medical centers are operated by different people and individuals. So feel at the time that these individuals know this kind of information, it is not, it is to be private, because for something to be private, it must be between one part, or it must be known to me. So at the time when the medics have such kind of information stored unto them, we feel like it is paramount for someone employing them in their own business, and for the smooth running of the business, and for the health upkeep of an individual, it is best that the employers know what kind of they're employing. And the other thing we get from opening government is, it is up to the right of choice. Then we question, is it not also the right of choice for the employer to know the kind of person they're employing? Because one, at the time someone is HIV positive, that means the immunity is so weak, they are designated to carry out certain activities, or they cannot actually do very heavy loads of work or do certain activities. So we feel it is also the choice of the employer to know what kind of person they're employing for the best and the smooth running of the business. So we feel at the time when you bring up the right of choice, and already having shown you this is an agreement that is known between two people. So when, if it is a right of choice and you feel like this is so private, and you have already disclosed it to the to the health centers, and you feel like you can actually not disclose it to a person employing you for your betterment and the betterment of someone's business, at that kind of point is null and void. Then also get aspects of psychological trauma, or something that is nullified, that they nullified it themselves, because with the kind of work characterization, like it is known to all employees, is itself wanting and very poor. So then they also come and tell us the ability of someone to perform. That is one of the greatest arguments, and actually a very interesting argument that come. Ability to perform one. But no, we feel like there is a linkage between someone's health and the kind of work they do. So at the time when you want to be a hypocrite to your own life, and lie about your health status, and you don't disclose how you're weak in some health points, and you feel like you can lie to people, and all of a sudden you're employed in a factory doing heavy work and you're HIV positive, that is also a disadvantage to you, and not just to you, to your workmates, and not just to your workmates, the business itself, and to the management of the business. So we feel like it is not only a point of the ability to work, we feel like there is a very big linkage between work and someone's health. So that kind of ability ceases and is nullified throughout all of today's debate. So let us get back to our case. So Pano, we feel like the best kind of characterization that you would get to understand this kind of debate is a disclosure, is a mandatory disclosure that is only known, or an agreement that is only known to the employer and to the employee they're employing. And why should it look so? Because one, there must be a deal that there must be a deal, or what the employer has to know why they're employing, or the kind of person they're employing, of what advantage is it to them. Because when it is one to the advantage of the person, like for example, let's take a scenario that one is sick. In case someone is sick, that means that the employer has to learn how to handle them, and they give them certain work. It's still to their advantage, panel. Then we get also our major arguments, which is one, the working conditions. So let us look at the working conditions, and why is it beneficial for us to disclose, or a mandatory disclosure once. Let us look at the nature of work they are getting, of the nature of work. So you cannot get someone who is HIV positive and employ them in a factory that produces a lot of fumes. That is one very bad to the kind of health they already have. You cannot get someone whose immunity is so weak and employ them in a scenario where they have to carry out very heavy loads. You can feel that is so much bad. And then the condition of work is also the employee needs, because you're working not in your father's business, in someone's business. So the employer needs to get the best out of their employees. And how does this come? This means that the employer has to designate to you some kind of work that is best in accordance to health and in accordance to performance. So we feel like it is best to the development of both the individual, that is the employer and the employee, and the business and the nation at large, that we must have mandatory disclosure of someone's status before they can be employed. So also let's get further, and we tell you through the nature of work itself. So Pano, what is the nature of work? What do you talk about? We feel like there is some type of work that people with HIV don't feel must not do. And how much it's not like we are getting them out of the employment sector, but we feel like they need to be catered for in ground, so around the working environment. That means that their health is paramount. That means that employers need to know how to handle them, and we cannot handle them before we know their statuses. That means the employers know how to designate them in how to work, or also allocate them work that is in a correspondence, that is in accordance to their type of health. So we feel like it is very much beneficial with the benefits that we have given to you. It is very much beneficial for us to disclose one's health status before as a pre-employment requirement. I beg to rest my case. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, the leader of opposition, for that fine speech. Let's welcome the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case of government. Hey, PM, DPM, sorry. I am going to confirm still whether Simon and Moses are hearing before the next comes.
I am on and I'm hearing very well.
Okay, then Moses.
I can also hear clearly.
Okay, Deputy Prime Minister, kindly proceed with your speech.
This is Esther. This is Patience Kisakye. And I'm here to oppose the mandatory disclosure of one's status, of one's STDs or STI status, e.g. HIV status, as a pre-employment requirement. And I will totally disagree with what the previous speaker has said, and I will stick to the definition of what is pre-employment requirement is, which is something directly needed in order to get a job or an employment, and mandatory disclosure is compulsorily make known to a group of people. And I'll base my discussion on a disagreement basing on what the previous speaker has said. One, he talked about the hospitals, that when you go to the hospitals and you are tested already, but I tell this that this information kind of these people, this kind of information is not as public as it should be when it is between the employer and the employee. And therefore, I stand to disagree with the current speaker and say that mandatory disclosure of one status is as a pre-employment requirement is not needed. And he talked about the weakness of the person. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to oppose kind of argument that some people are weak. I'm here to say that some people are naturally weak when even they are not HIV. And we are evident that these HIV are actually healthy and are enough to do any kind of work. And he talked about the ability to perform work is linked with health. And I'm here to say, once you apply for certain work, means that you are already qualified, already have all the requirements for you to perform that kind of work. Meaning that me being like, if one is HIV, he can do the same work as negative, and therefore kind of should not be made. And he talked about the working conditions, whereby he argued that some people who work, if you still must, like, you have some side effects, you are in factory of fuels. But I want to tell the house, ladies and gentlemen, that fuels affect people. It affects anyone, whether HIV or negative. I disagree with this argument that if I'm HIV and I'm working in which is fuels, that I will be affected more than a person who is healthy and working under the same condition. Meaning that if working condition, then favorable for both of us, whether positive or negative. Therefore, this kind of discrimination not be done, and do oppose that mandatory one status should not be requirement of employment. And I'm going to talk about right of privacy. As a leader of the Prime Minister has already said, if we disclose everything to these employers are not trusted people. How can I trust a person whom I don't stay with, whom I don't know what is doing after here? So maybe if I disclose everything regarding my status, he can go ahead and tell some other people. This kind of information to be limited. Maybe one person at the hospital. It's the hospital that tested me, and hospital has a kind of confidentiality which these employers, most of them, do not have. When I give out my information, it would be linked to other people. Therefore, I'm also talking about the choice of a person. Like I'm saying that it should either to disclose his health status or not, because if it's a choice, it means by choice I can say that I'm HIV or not, regardless of whether it will be a requirement for unemployment, whether I set my status or not, it would not affect me in any way of getting unemployment. And I'm going to emphasize on a point of discrimination. Majority people health statuses, and it's evident in our constitution that we should not be discriminated depending on our health. Meaning that if I disclose and my employer gets to know that I'm HIV, will be in a highest percentage of not getting unemployment. Meaning that I'm lagging behind. I'm not going to get unemployment, and which is actually unfair to me, who is HIV, and unfair to my family, because they expect a lot. Therefore, this kind of mandatory disclosure should not be emphasized as a requirement for one to get unemployment. Another thing, it should be for one to get unemployment. To me, I think it should be related to someone's ability. Here, I mean that if one is capable, I should be that kind of job, whether I'm HIV, because by the time I apply, it means I'm very capable, whether I'm HIV, whether I'm HIV negative. Therefore, I'm here to open the mandatory disclosure of one status as a requirement for employment. I beg to submit.
All right, thank you so much, the DPM, for closing the OG case. Let's welcome the Deputy Leader of Operations to close the case.
So,
Just before you come in, let me still know whether the judges are closing in. I'm really going to make this like a ritual to ensure we are on the same page, since it's an online tournament. Yes, Simon and Moses, you could just maybe text in the chat space.
Simon here, I can hear him. I'm still on.
Then Moses. Moses, you can. Okay, sure. Go. David, you can move ahead and yeah.
Okay, before I start, can I just know whether people are still getting me clearly?
The people you want them to, the judges can hear you, David. You can
Okay.
go on. All three
Okay.
judges hear you.
I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. So, panel, it is very much important in a motion such as this House opposes mandatory disclosure of one's STD or STI status as a pre-employment requisite that we first of all understand the nature of mandatory disclosure. Who is disclosing and to who? But also at a point that OG comes up with a very funny case of simply giving you reasons as to why you see mandatory disclosure is bad. They don't still show us why they go ahead to oppose it in the first. But anyway, let us take them at their best. First thing you get from them is the very poor characterization and the definition that was still taken up by the Deputy Prime Minister in this case. For them, they think that mandatory disclosure as a prerequisite, a pre-employment requisite, is actually getting someone's information and giving it out there to the employees. We are still telling you that that is not the case, simply because the employees in a particular company are actually not very much interested whether some person is joining in or not. This is going to happen because there's that sole relationship or agreement that happens between the employer and the employee. And at the point that the employee goes ahead to dash out this information, which comes out as a claim that, oh, some employers are not trusted, so they'll dash out this information. We still think that there exists in the current status quo mechanisms such as employer-employee relationship, that at a point that the things are disclosed, that the employee has the ability to go and his employer to the courts of law. But still moving forward, from that, you understand that most of the arguments, such as discrimination, will not stand, simply because you still be able to work with employees who may not or may not even know at one day that you even have this aid. So we think that is not standing in this particular debate. But also, when they talk about their key thing being, you see, right to privacy, we are still telling them, and their reason is, oh, you see, these employers are not trusted. We still ask them one question: are the medical doctors that they go to check them are actually trusted? That is one. But even if they are, let us just look at the nature of an employer. Has two things. One, he wants to see or wants to get the best in his company. But secondly, he wants to ensure that the person who is going to ensure he gets his best is also treated best. That is why our case comes in this particular house. But also, panel, you'd have to understand that in our case, we are simply telling you that there's a linkage between health and the work performed by this particular individual. Even when they come up and say, oh, you see, there are people with AIDS that have a strong immunity and people without AIDS that do not have, we still tell them it is actually in our world that when they disclose this, that the employers are in a better position to actually cater for them and know where their limits are, simply because if they don't, at one point, when these people get an effect on their health, they're still going to blame the employers because these are the people that gave them the job. So we think that at that point, it is very much justifiable, and there's no reason as to why we need to oppose it, as opposed to what PM gives you or the Prime Minister gives you in this case. But secondly, we still tell you that the nature of work in itself, okay, at the point that the OG doesn't even give you parameter, or we can even still debate this motion anywhere else. Let us look at jobs such as the porn industry. Okay, it is very much important that an individual, even before they go into that world, they know their HIV status so that they don't spread this disease to other people. That this argument really stands, simply because these people have a right to be protected. And we're not saying that people with HIV, AIDS, or other STIs should not actually go ahead and do porn activities, etc. We're still saying at that point, we still get better means to actually protect these people and ensure that we are still developing this company at the end of the day. Now, realize that in our cost-benefit analysis or impact analysis, we are going to still give you two things. One, we think that it is only in our house that we give you a better ground for catering for the sick people, as the PM was saying in this debate, that the Constitution allows that we cater for all of them. We are not going to be able to cater for them if we do not know their STI or STD, let me say, status, simply because it is very much important that at the point that someone is sick and they give in this information, it is important that the employer will be able to give this person a particular work or job that they can do best. And we think that is still including them in the work space, which we only get from the side OO in this particular debate. But we also think that for the development of a job or a particular company, because this debate is running towards the development of the employer, number one, but also the employee. At the point that the employer wants the very best for his company, we think it is just important he knows the type of people that is actually going to go ahead and employ. And at the point that we have people that are, that are strong with HIV, it is still important that in our house, as the employer, we are better to cater for these people because we will know their limits and how they operate. Not forget that there's a direct linkage between health and the worker. As my leader of opposition told you here, we cannot get someone who has HIV/AIDS and take them to work in an industry where fumes are too much. They come and say these fumes affect people. But let us look at the immunity of these people. The nature of HIV/AIDS is one that it doesn't kill, but other diseases kill you. That simply means if I have HIV/AIDS and I get cough, that cough is going to increase so much in me, unlike to the other person who actually doesn't have HIV/AIDS and has cough. So at the point that we have these two workers, and how do we know? Is simply because we have done this mandatory disclosure of their STI statuses. So at that point, we really feel that actually we are better to know that, oh, this person, even if they are able to work here, we think they cannot be able to work there simply because we are protecting their lives and we are still benefiting. We are still benefiting the company in itself. But also, we are still telling you we don't want a situation where there is a blame game here. I've still told you how that answers well. But let us go back to exactly what the DPM brings in this particular debate in my last minute. So he says, or she says that, oh, you see, these fumes affect everyone, and she majorly dwells on the right of privacy. On the right of privacy, we are still telling you, and also the right of choice. We still tell you one response here. Pano, is it in order that the employees choose not to disclose for us the information at the point that we have given reasons as to why they need to disclose, and the employers who are giving them this job don't have the choice to choose the very best people or the people that are capable? Because we have still told you there's a linkage between you working and your health status. So at that point, we really feel that the question of choice does not stand in this particular debate. But we still tell you that at a point we think that these people are going to still be catered for at their best on privacy, simply because there exists mechanisms that go ahead to protect these people. At a point that the employer who is not trustworthy goes ahead to break them, the state will hold him accountable. Even these people will hold them accountable. So we still think it is a win-win situation at a point that these people disclose. At the end of the day, we are the only team that goes ahead to show you that, number one, it is just very much important for people to disclose their STI statuses because of, one, the nature of work, but also ensuring that they live and do the best of the work and enable that the employers benefit, but also they themselves go ahead to benefit. With that, allow me submit.
All right, thank you, Deputy Leader, for closing the opening half. Let's welcome the member of government to continue the speech of the government teams. I'm going to first confirm whether the judges can still at this point in time listen and get a sound. Moses and Simon, if you can consent.
I'm still on, very much on.
Okay, that's good. Member of government, the floor.
Can I be heard?
Yeah, sure. And we heard your voice.
Is breaking.
You are very clear. Kindly proceed with the speech.
I'm going to get an external timer because I cannot access the chat space. So in case you have a POI, please unmute. Please unmute, or in the 4th minute I'll be able to take your POI. So we'll start in 3, 2, 1. We go. So, panel, today we are discussing the motion of this House opposes the mandatory disclosure of one's STDs or STI status, and we give an example of HIV status as a pre-employment requirement. Now, panel, we believe that the definition brought about by the opposition team that you only focus in this information to be disclosed by to the employees is very substantial in this debate. But as a panel, we believe that when the opening opposition came and talked about the nature of work HIV patients can do and can't do, does not withstand in this debate because of two major reasons. One, we currently have treatment in place that renders an HIV patient to be able to do any kind of work irrespective. We have treatment like ARVs that renders an HIV patient to be able to do any kind of work. Now, we also get to realize that there are other there are other Excuse me, someone is speaking in the background. They're interrupting.
Member, I'm going to pause your time. Yeah, going to pause your time. You have used 1 minute.
The judge Rufata is not muted, so he's bringing echoes. That's why he has stopped speaking. That's why the member has stopped speaking.
I beg to be part- Okay.
Yeah, can that person please mute? Thank you very much. So I'll proceed. As we were stating that we currently have the nature that as when the opposition team came and talked about the issue of the nature of work that a person has to do and also the efficiency of a specific patients of specific sexually transmitted diseases, the panel that does not hold in this debate. We believe that a person is not judged by the work they can do, but is not judged by their medical record, but by the work they can do. We believe that a pre-employment requisite that can hold for a person not to be employed is their medical record, but not in particular their sexually transmitted disease record. Now we believe that in the case of HIV, we currently have treatment in Uganda that renders a person very effective and can be able to deliver work at the end of the day. Now, panel two, when the people came here and talked about the health versus work, that when a person is employed, when opening opposition came here and talked about the health versus work constraint, we believe that we currently have treatment in place that will render some of the STIs which are curable like gonorrhea, that a person will be able to cure gonorrhea at the end of the day. Panel, we believe that we as a closing government, we are going to surround our case on 2 or 3 basic principles. 1, the nature of society. 2, exploitation. And 3, stigmatization. Now, panel, we have to understand one thing, that the nature of society is a driving factor that renders this argument very key in this debate. Now, when we talk about nature of society, we are currently living in a society that is so judgmental and renders people with STIs outcasts. Now, panel, we're in the 21st century, but people still look at patients of HIV, irrespective of whether employee or not employee, or employer, employee or not employee, that they will still look at the person who has a specific sexually transmitted disease as a person who's probably a reject. Now, 2, when this occurs, we're having a scenario of stigmatization. Now, when you have a scenario of stigmatization, this person will be rendered prone to the employer at the end of the day. Now, 2, we believe that when someone is prone to the employer at the end of the day, the employer has a stone over them and is mandated to do, in most cases, not what their work mandates, but what the employer mandates them to do, which in most cases does not go with the work they have to do. Now, panel, moving forward, we get to realize that one other key aspect that we bring as closing government is the issue of exploitation. As you will get realized from my whip is that some of these people who are employed in specific fields are not employed and married but because of appearance. Now, panel, we believe that in the situation that someone's HIV status or probably sexually transmitted disease status is acknowledged out there and spread to the employer will have the choice to either exploit or not exploit. But the scenario that some of these details are kept within, the employer will, even though when they are going to make an exploit on that specific employee, they will withhold themselves back because they believe they do not know adequate information about a specific employer. Now, panel, we as closing government render that when you talk about discrimination as stated by the opening government, that you can, if you talk about discrimination, POI taken.
Well, at a point that you realize that this disclosure is only going to the employer himself, how then does your point that the society is going to judge them at the point that it is only the employer and the employee that know this person's status? Thank you.
Now, panel, I would like to clarify on that issue very, very categorically. When I said that the nature of society, and I said nature of society, now, nature of society is society that involves that includes the employer, employees, and fellow employees. Now, panel, we get to realize that when I say the nature of society currently does not understand how some of these STIs are spread and some of these how these STDs are spread from one person to another. We shall have a context whereby an employer will have a specific mindset about people who are HIV positive, irrespective of the current people HIV positive have access to treatment. Now, panel, moving forward, we believe that exploitation is something that we shall be rendering out when we oppose the mandatory exposure of these details. Now, we believe that most of the exploitations we are having currently at the workplace are due to the fact that some of these people know some of these status, and we believe that even though they rape them, they will not have the effect of having sexually transmitted disease at the end of the day. So, panel, we as closing government, when the opening government came here and talked about discrimination, it weighed down it weighed down in this specific area. Now we believe that when you talk about the aspect of discrimination, discrimination does not hold if only an employee. It will hold in this scenario. An employer will be forced with the burden of having specific work for this specific individual, not based on merit. Now, panel, we believe that the strongest cases that can hold in the reason why we oppose the mandatory exposure of some of these things is the aspect of exploitation and stigmatization and the aspect of the current nature of society we have in Uganda. Now, panel, also the opposition came and talked about that efficiency. Now, efficiency of a person is not weighed by having you believe that that person is sickly of a sexually transmitted disease. We believe that some of the sexually transmitted diseases have a cure and some do not have a cure. Now, some of the sexually transmitted diseases like HIV that are not, that's the only sexually transmitted disease that doesn't have a cure, believes that they also have treatment that make that person specifically sick of that disease very, very effective and can serve the specific cause that they're working in. So we believe, panel, we believe that we as closing government, the best we can do is that we are going to render that these people here will not share their status, because we believe that when you share the status, you're facing an effect of possibility of being exploited by your worker, and two, there's a high chance of you being stigmatized because the worker will have this nature of society that we currently live in that renders that people who are living with sexually transmitted diseases are not able to perform some of their duties effectively. Now, panel, when you talk about medical doctors in relation to employers, medical doctors are stated by the opposition, the deputy leader and also the leader of opposition, that medical doctors are bound by their oath that they do assign to as medical doctors, as opposed to the employer who does not even have a non-disclosure form that they're signing at the end of the day. Now, believe that we got to realize that if something is a prerequisite for employment, it only holds for that person to be employed in that specific company. Now, Pano, we also get to realize that the position failed to categorically explain to us how, when someone's status is disclosed, how it is going to be affecting the flow of the company. Now, Kapano, when the leader of opposition came and talked about that this will affect the flow of work, we ask ourselves two questions to opposition: that how then does someone's status affect flow of work if it is only if you categorically say it is only disclosed to the employer? Now, we believe that the flow of work is not affected by someone's sexually transmitted disease status, but is only affected by a medical report, which is a very key prerequisite in most working areas. Probably someone is sick for a specific disease and cannot be able to perform a specific task, but HIV, gonorrhea, or other sexually transmitted diseases do not render anyone ineffective to perform a specific task. Now, two, we also want to safeguard these employees from judgment from their employer. Now, the employer, after getting this information, have a tendency to judge their employees not based on merit but based on sickness. And we have scenarios of where someone is being judged not because of their work ethic but because of their health at the end of the day. Now, panel, we as closing government stand and we acknowledge that the only thing that can be acceptable in this debate, irrespective of what the case that closing opposition will bring on the table, is that exploitation. We are ruling out cases of exploitation, two, cases of stigmatization, and above all, we are in a society that does not acknowledge and does not welcome people with sexually transmitted disease. Okay, I beg to rest.
Thank you, member. Let's come to the member of opposition. Hey. Moses and Simon, just text the chat space before the speaker starts whether you can hear them. Just to ensure speakers know that. Yeah, I'm here, guys. I hope you can hear.
Okay, can I be heard?
Oh, Vincent, can you wait a second? Let's first hear from Simon whether he's around.
All right.
Who exactly is speaking? I am. Okay, Judge Simon. Sure. 10 seconds, right? 10 seconds. I've started counting. Okay, thank you, Simon, for getting back. That was record time. Let's have the member of opposition to clarify the debate.
Okay, I hope I'm still audible.
Yeah, you're audible.
All right, so for points of information, feel free to unmute and ask. Yeah, I think that would be all. So I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1, 4. I think the problem with government case is they assume that these requirements are bad and that's all they engage. They don't engage why they exist in the first place. So what I'm going to prove in my speech is prove why these protection, all these requirements are required. 2, maybe how they exist, and then 3, the impact it has on society when companies are not able to do everything. So I think the basic question to ask is why do these requirements actually exist? Why do companies actually mandate employees to give out their information? I think it all touches on this, but I think we're going to stress on the obligation of companies. They have to protect their image. They have to protect these employees and other employees because we don't think that these employees work in these companies alone. And we are going to prove why it affects the productivity of these companies and why it is bad. That is going to be under the impact it has on society. So I'm going to start with engaging at least maybe the most relevant government bench in this debate. So they say, these employees have the same ability as other employees. I think this is very laughable because I think someone on medication, it simply means they are sick. It simply means they can't function as the rest of other people. So it means that we can't hold them accountable to the same standard. The mere fact that you're taking an ARV, a chemical, which means it has an impairment on your ability to concentrate on at work. We think when you remove this policy, it simply means that companies don't have any sort of obligation to protect these individuals. It looks like under the status quo, you give women like leave because they're pregnant, because you understand their ability to work is impaired by them having pregnancy. That is why these conditions exist. The same condition exists for this sick individual because you recognize when they're taking medication, you can't expect them to deliver the quantity of work you would expect of other people. So therefore, you give some level of discipline and discretion for them to ensure that they're able to function within this work companies and all that. We don't think these people are normal and they should be given fair treatment at workplaces. We think when you remove this sort of rule, it simply means you hold them to the same standard as other employees, which simply means it becomes unfair. And we think the impacts become great when you have more workers dying at workplaces because you simply don't have these protection measures within workplaces to ensure that the weakest employees are actually protected because we think these people are the weakest in society. We think the next point they talk about is stigma and how like people will always stigmatize. We think this is essentially the flow of government case because they assume all these things exist so that people know you are sick and therefore they can stigmatize you. Two responses to this. I think when you're working in a company, it simply means that the majority of people within those companies are actually learned individuals. That means they went to school. At least they can empathize with other people. They recognize they are victims of circumstance. That is why you don't get a lot of backlash with people that are informed. We are not dealing with village people. So this case is nonsensical in this debate because we educate you so that you are more informed, so that you are more likely to be relatable to other people, more understanding of other people. That is why I think we regard people that are educated with high standards as opposed to people that are not educated. So this is simply not the case. We think most people at workplaces are more understandable when they know you're sick. They are more likely to treat you better. We think this protection is removed when you don't actually have this condition where employees no longer know whether you're sick or not. So there will be a lot more stigma when everyone treats you the same way with other people. When you disappear from one place because you're taking your medication, they start questioning, what is this guy doing? Is something wrong with him? We think that builds to more stigma. That is where they're not able to function and sort of perform well at workplaces. So the next thing they talk about is exploitation, which I think is bogus because all these things are already illegal. Everything they talk about is literally illegal. You do it, the government holds you accountable. You do it, you're actually fired, or the company is shut down because you're violating the rights of workers. We essentially don't think this is a case government can actually win on. So moving on to our case, like first one is the obligation of companies and what duty do they have. We think when companies employ you, they have a duty to protect you, they have a duty to protect other employees, they have a duty to protect their image. Why does this change when you employ such a policy, when you oppose such a policy? It means that when individuals die at workplaces, the company gets bad publicity because they no longer know who is sick and who is not. Therefore, they can't sort of distribute work according to your ability. That simply means an employee that is sick, that has to be taking medicine at 2 p.m., is given work that goes to 3 p.m. Therefore, he misses to take the drug they're supposed to take. That simply means your health deteriorates, and at some point, you might die at this workplace, which simply means that the employer actually gets bad publicity. So it means they are not able to get more employees. It simply means the government is likely going to shut them down. Therefore, they lose the ability to actually control how many people are impacted at their workplaces. I think this is the level opposition engages, that the employee wants to protect these people, to give you work that is good for you. We think they do a good job at this. We think the next thing they don't do is prove to you that these people actually work with other people. So for instance, you're a doctor, you're operating someone. We think there's a risk of you transferring your infection to the patients you're working for. So it is required for a hospital to know whether you're sick or not, to avoid backlash. So it means the protection is not only for you, it's for the patients you're going to work on, it's for the employees that others are interacting with you. So that's why they exist, so that there are conditions in place to ensure that you don't infect other people. This is why they primarily exist in the place. So we don't think this is necessarily a problem. We think it's a good thing, because I've already told you how, like, people are educated, they are more likely to be understanding when you're sick, they are supportive actually when you're sick. So we think this information becomes helpful when you have a moral support at workplace, as opposed to where no one understands whether you're sick or not. So simply, we think this obligation becomes better when companies are able to actually create a conducive workplace for all employees, not just a sick individual. This is why this condition actually exists in the first place, to ensure those people are well protected. So what are the impacts you get when you don't have these policies? I think it's very clear is that you get more companies actually failing to offer this protection. That simply means that they get bad publicity. When they get bad publicity, it simply means they don't get workers, they don't get productive output in their job. So it simply means profit deteriorate, and that affects the economy at large. So we have a society where companies are losing gradually, because they are not able to implement protection that they ensure that they have productive employees. That is impact. It means the economy deteriorates and the poor people are impacted. The second impact is that you have most of these people actually losing their jobs, because you now hold them to the same account as people that are normal within workplaces, which is very bad, because these are the people that need the money most when they're unable to get work, when most of them are unemployed. So they are more dependent on people, and they face more stigma because they are not able to fend for themselves as a result of not being able to disclose your sort of status. We think this is very bad, so we are very proud to oppose.
All right, thank you so much, the member of opposition. Judges indicating the chat space so that you're still following. Member, I think government whip, get ready to close the government case. I see Moses is typing, meaning he's okay. Simon, are you still following? Okay. That's good.
So can you hear?
Yes, we can hear you. Kindly proceed with your speech.
So before I start my speech, I would like to inform
You are
anyone who has a POI to put it in text space, and I will take it in the future. Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you count 1 to 10?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Okay, so I think you can now move on.
So I was saying that anyone with the POI can put it in the text space, and then I would also like to thank my partner for this far we have gone. Let's the debate start. So panel, in my first 3 minutes, I would like to take away CO, then OO would be taken away within 1 minute. Then I would show you why then we rank above OG. So what then does OO come with? OO comes with the idea that companies have the obligations to protect their workers. We concede to that, but what we do not concede to is that we have to first show you the or the primary purpose of the existence of a company. We think a company exists because they want to make profits, right? So at a point in time where one is able to perform their work that can make a company to get its profits, we think they are out. So we think when they say that they want to protect their image, we think then that idea is totally vague. How? Because we think that in the 21st century, someone having HIV, stroke, STDs, or something of sort is something that cannot make someone's image be bad or even or even regrettable. But another thing that we need to show you is that even an individual with HIV has that sole purpose to take care of themselves. Therefore, he doesn't need anything like company to help him with that sort of medicine. So we think that idea is totally out and totally vague. So what then do they come and talk about? They talk about the idea of medicine, saying that at any point where someone takes a chemical, they are naturally they are naturally weak. We say no. At a point in time where someone is able to deliver what their work mandatory wants them to do, we then say that they are not weak to deliver that sort of work. But also say at a point in time where they feel weak, that is when the idea of them choosing that sort of personal person to tell at that sort of workspace. That's why we think it is important, but not necessarily making mandatory. So then when they so that it majorly brings trashes the case of the requirement. What does OO come and say? When OO basically talks about the facts, the nature of works, we think the nature is actually out. Why? I want to show you how efficiency is not on their side and how then efficiency is not on our side. So when they say the nature of work, they basically talk about. I said put in the text space, please. Thank you so much. When OO basically talks about the nature of work, like the porn industry and stuff, therefore we think that this sort of characterization is actually narrow. Yes, we need to also characterize. But understand, this one happens in a world where individuals have faced that sort of stigmatization just because of the status of their health. So what this means on impact analysis, it means that they are not safeguarded, as in the individual's dignity is not safeguarded at these spaces. So what that means is even when that necessary comes, like when an individual works so hard and they have that sort of productivity and they are able to help a company get to some certain profits, there is that sort of achievement that the company says that, oh, let's uplift him. So we think in their world that sort of thing cannot happen because the employers would think that if uplift this person, maybe he has a short lifespan or something of sort, which we think is very problematic. But then, a comparative on our side, it would look like it would safeguard the individual's dignity and pride as at office spaces, meaning that at a point where they do that sort of stuff, we think they can be even uplifted. So also talk about the public view of STDs, and which I think this would take away the idea that Vincent comes with of stigmatization, saying that they live in a world where they are land individuals. Sort of characterization about land individuals. We think in a company looks like this. Every person is working so hard to reach the end goal of the company because they know the sole purpose has. So what that means is that every person also wants that sort of promotion in a company. So at a point in time where we have the same degree, at a point in time where we have the same qualifications, now then the idea that would happen is that now my medical results or the fact that I have that sort of HIV would then make me not to be promoted just because of you. But then the public view of STDs, we think that the public views someone's idea of medication results as hypersensitive. People are still so irrational when dealing with such things, and in such spaces where people are still irrational, we think it is now then opposed to have that mandatory disclosure. But then also characterizing what it means with STDs and HIV. We think I mean people with STDs and HIV. We think people with STDs look like this. People who have the economical stigmatization, that is to say, they have actually gotten that sort of need to get that sort of money because one, we have showed you that the public does not actually want them because they are too irrational. So the only thing that they can do is to now to depend on companies to get that sort of money. Understand? So what is OO asking? OO is saying at a point that companies are profit seeking. Why then would they employ HIV positive person? We think that sort of idea is totally out because we have showed you that that sort of is null and void. How? Because at a point in time where that sort of HIV person is able to actually deliver what the company needs, you cannot say that you cannot actually employ them. But then, what do we show you on stakeholder analysis? Three things. The stakeholder on people with STD stroke TI. We show you one thing, that people look like one. We show you that these people look like that, want that sort of economic, have actually gotten that sort of economic stigmatization, and the society itself has stigmatized them. So we think now the only way to survive, survival for the fittest, is now to get those sort of jobs right. So we also think on that idea, if the company gives them jobs, we think now they're actually going to fit. That is on the principle of human dignity, how they view themselves as immoral and less human. But then on the idea of companies, we show you that at the point in time where we actually employ these people, basing on what they can actually do, basing on their qualifications, we think the idea that companies will not make profits is actually out. But then the idea of exploitation, we tell you two things. We tell you that companies actually exist. That is why when they are employing secretaries, or when you are going in any sort of company, most of the secretaries are actually more beautiful. Why? Because their employers employ them just because they want to exploit their human rights and the other stuff, right? So we think at that point that would actually bring or instigate fear into those employers who actually exploit their employees, while okay, they look at that sort of benefit after employing them, like eat them, take them out, and we show you that at that point we think that can not happen in our world. So three things why we win OG basically bases its matter on discrimination, but then we are able to analyze it and show you how then our side shows on impact analysis. We win panel.
Okay, thank you so much for that fine speech. I am going to then call for the opposition group to close the debate. I'm going to ask Moses and Simon to still consent whether they are getting the sound signal as we go to the last speaker. Moses is typing. I think Simon is left. Simon? 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 Simon, can you? In that particular case, the last speaker of the round to close the debate.
Hi, TJ, am I audible?
Yes, you are. You're audible.
Okay. All right, let me get my timer here, then we should be good to go. Just a second. Mm. Okay, so guys, if you have a POI, just unmute yourself and ask me. Though, if you say the POI once, I'll have heard, so there's no need to repeat yourself over, and in that way interrupt my speech. So, Chair, I'll be using a different timer. So, in case there is any inconsistency between my timer and what you have, you can unmute yourself at the end of my speech and tell me that the time is done. But I trust I'll be done on time. All right. So, all right. So, the first thing to say here is a few rebuttals to what you get from Ian, right? So, first of all, he tries to say that, well, while we're trying to protect individuals, we think that individuals already have an obligation to protect themselves, right? So, for instance, they can take their medicines and all that. Instance where people are being self-employed, right? So, for instance, if you're purely self-employed, then you can say, "I will know when to take my medicine" and all that. Understand that when you are working in another company, it means that, for instance, your boss could choose to send you to an errand at a time when you're supposed to take your medicines. What will happen, right? When like they don't know about your status, right? We think that that crucially leads you to side effects like the ones that Odong has already pointed out, i.e., like dying because like it has been a while before you took your medicines consistently, right? But understand that the alternative is such that, for instance, these patients are going to take their medication in hiding. We think that this is actually like on the same metric with what you get from the CG side, i.e., trauma, right? The fact that an individual cannot take their medicines which we think again like is self-defeatist. The other thing to say to like Ian's case is the idea of how we think he contradicts his MG, right? Understand that the MG comes and agrees that the disclosure we're talking about here is for individuals that are running the companies. But when you look at the analysis that this guy Ian tries to bring out, is really an analysis that he's talking about the whole kind of company setting, right? That's why he tells you that society is discriminative and all those particular things. We think those things do not merit because it's a direct contradiction from what the MG has already said. Because like the disclosure that we're talking about here is not like for all companies, and I mean for all individuals in the company. And as Odong has already elaborated, we think like there's a mitigation because first of all, these guys are highly educated, right? The guys that are running these companies, right? But also understand, as I'll be showing you further, and as our extension is that these guys have like an image to protect, right? So to the extent then that they disclose this particular information, then they will be going against their kind of image. Now, understand that the CG team well has very good rebuttals, but really by and large has just one case, which is exploitation, right? The other things really that they talk about are things that have already been talked about by the OG team, right? Things like stigmatization only, which is really the other thing. But that notwithstanding, a few responses to stigmatization before I get to the idea of exploitation. Understand that these guys try to strawman both the CG and OG, right? Like no team here is trying to say that guys with HIV cannot work, right? All we are saying from side opposition is that these guys have different abilities, right? And that we cannot treat them to the same standard. To the extent that these guys just want to pretend that anyone here is trying to say these guys should be discriminated, we think that they are taking like a soft end of this debate and they cannot be able to win. Understand that to be able to appreciate this particular kind of comparative is when, for instance, you borrow from PWDs. What happens, for instance, at a workplace when you do not have these PWDs using verandas? Is that to say that they are discriminatory, or is that to say that the workplace is actually recognizing that these individuals cannot use ladders and so bring some other form of way in which they can get into buildings? We think crucially the government teams do not understand this particular narrative. They deserve to rank third and fourth. Now, on the idea of exploitation, right? Understand that this goes against the confidentiality, right? Odong already tells you that particularly this thing would be illegal, yeah? But again, we don't think this will work because, as we've already told you, these guys have an image protect, right? All the worker will have to do is come out and get out there in the public and say, look here, this is what the company is doing, right? Understand that these companies are having a lot of money on them and they will lose the partners, right? The customers, because right now, the world in which we're working in, corporate image is also important. To the extent that then these guys do not appreciate this, we think that they deserve not to get a good ranking in this particular debate. So we tell you that to the extent that these guys have this kind of bargaining power, really these employers will not do that. But even if Pano, you're not going to buy that particular thing, understand that the employers are also bringing a certain attribute in the company that the employers need, right? So as I've already told you, probably these are guys that are highly skilled, right? We think that an employer who is going to exploit a worker, risks that worker to move actually to another company, right? So this person is not going to actually exploit them because they need them around. If these guys are already high skilled, then you cannot exploit them because you need them. We think that that level of kind of response, sort of response, what you get from the government team in the closing. Now, the kind of alternative they want to bring in terms of trying to instead disclosing information is to say that majority of the STDs are actually curable, right? They talk about things like gonorrhea and that only HIV is actually the disease that cannot be cured. But understand that even if we talk about those diseases, we think crucially that even those diseases need to be sort of disclosed to the employers. I mean, like the guys that are running the companies. Understand, for instance, that UTIs can be infected in terms of the urinary places, like the toilets, right? If these guys are sharing the same toilets with other employers, we can have these guys infect the rest of the employers. So understand that where these guys do not know about this particular fact, I'll take you, but just a minute, then it means that there will be this particular kind of situation coming up. And what will this happen? Then it will mean that then that extends to damaging other kind of employers. So granted, these guys have rights, right? But these rights cannot be upheld at the expense of the rights of other individuals. I'll take that POI.
Can you differentiate between a UTI and an STI?
Oh God, I don't know wherever you're leading to, and perhaps you should have made that particular distinction. I don't think that really is a big deal, but whatever it is, like I think I've sort of already responded to that. So quickly, panel, why do we think that we rank above our opening, right? The first thing is to bring in this whole narrative of like the company image, right? To tell you that this is not just a debate of whether these guys will need to actually that these guys need to, you know, like there's the linkage between health and employment, and that if they don't know about their health, they can allocate them and all that. Granted, that's a good thing, right? But we tell you that crucially there's an element of the image, right? Like if at all an employee is being employed at your workplace and these guys get to be um, 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 dead, right, or like diminishing their health and all those particular things, we think that this has a ripple effect, right? Because these companies have an image out there. Guys will be wondering, like, how can an employee at such a place end up in such a situation? We tell you that that's a guarantee that will tell you, and crucially, guarantee that these guys are not going to do the particular things, but also crucially need to know the status of those guys. The other idea really that we talk about is a impact that this policy will bring about, and I think that has been elaborated by Odong. So let me rest.
Looks the whip has finished his speech, so this is time done, guys. Thank you so much for this wonderful round. That's far the road has carried you. We wish you all the best of luck. Yeah, this is a closed round. Results will be coming in a bit later. Just keep within the community. I'm going to ask the judges to move to room 25 and start our deliberation.
Good round, everyone. Good up.